Dune Combat teaches a lot about what fighting is and how is always contextual, and I am going to explain you why. Hello HEMA friends and welcome to this new video. If you have read Dune or watched the movies, especially the new ones, you probably know the relevance of sword fighting in that sci-fi universe. The motivation behind this is the so-called Holtzman shield, a kind of force field, let's call it, which is able to stop or slow down fast-moving objects. Generally speaking, we can say that the higher the speed and the better the stopping power of this kind of shield. Soldiers, assassins and every sort of fighter in the Dune universe tend to wear a personal Holtzman shield. This is not possible only while traveling on the sands of Arrakis itself, namely Dune, the planet at the center of the saga. This is because the vibrations made by the shield itself have the tendency to attract the giant sandworms living beneath the sands of Arrakis. Now, these shields, as you probably already figured out, modify a lot the way in which sword fighting is applied in combat, but especially trained. You know, I am all about training as training, and the training alone makes people able to fight and relate to the various combat conditions they are going to face, generally speaking. Now, when people talk about fighting and sword fighting, there is always someone asking, but will this work in a real fight? Or does this work on the street? Or similar questions. Well, the average dude watching a couple of Sardaukar, the best soldiers of this sci-fi universe, training sword fighting, would find enough in the condition to ask the same question. And most probably, the Sardaukar, after decapitating the guy, would explain to his cold body that this is indeed real fighting. Techniques are intended to overcome the shield of the opponent, and that's why it looks so weird if compared to standard knife and sword fighting. Yes, because to overcome the shield of the opponent, the fighters in Dune need to slow down a little their actions before the blade gets in contact with the shield. This in the new films it is possible to figure out only partially, because to be able to bring fighting on the screen in this way without making it look goofy, they decided to speed up a lot many actions, and only show this kind of particular aspect of their fighting in specific conditions and situations. First of all, we see it explained plainly when Paul Atreides trains sword and knife fighting.
The slow blade penetrates the shield.
Then we see it when Paul is dueling with Yamis, a Fremen on Arrakis. This scene, if read in this way, it is pretty cool as Paul simply acts on his conditioning and slows down the cut, which makes him actually able to think to what he is doing, and he gets stuck due to the fact that he never killed someone before. And the third scene is Fade Rautha fighting the Atreides soldiers in the arena. Here, the Atreides soldier manages to find an opening into the guard of Fade, but being desperate and under an overwhelming level of stress, the soldier speeds up the action too much to finish the fight, which makes him, funny enough, unable to end it there. In fact, the art of sword fighting in Dune is far more about controlling the weapon than what it actually is in reality. The art stays in, first of all, creating the right conditions to hit with an action that has to slow down a little to increase the chance of penetrating the shield directly without the huge, slowdown effect that we see in the Fade Rautha duel. The more the fighter is able to find the balance between too fast and too slow, the more they are skilled at fighting. And the more they are able to transition between fast, slow and fast again in a smooth, clean and fast way, the better they are at fighting. This in the films is represented by Duncan Idaho fighting against the Sardaukar in one of the most cool scenes of the first film. So what is the teaching behind all of this? Well, the teaching is that fighting is, unluckily for us, contextual. There is always some kind of rule to follow. in the greatest majority of the cases, and sometimes it is a hard rule, such as in Dune, dictated by tools and technologies applied in combat. These rules needs to be taken into account while training to recreate the best training conditions to safely develop a fighting style which fits the proper fighting conditions in which it is going to be applied. But this also means that if that conditions vary a little, such as for Paul fighting Yanis without wearing a shield, your conditioning may actually go against your own benefits sometimes. There are also what I call soft rules, namely the rules which we impose to ourselves. This may be for social motivations and duties, such for the engagement rules of a police officer, for safety motivations, such as in the case of a sport match, or for collaborative motivations, such as for a group of Navy SEALs fighting alongside each other. If harder rules needs to be dealt with to develop a more effective and or lethal way of fighting, the soft rules are on average meant to protect someone else, and they are generally meant to restrict voluntarily the options and conditions abilities of the fighter. If all of this was actually real, seeing a bunch of Atreides fighters training would actually feel kind of familiar to an extent. In fact, the act of slowing down an action and controlling it before hitting is a typical artifact we see in traditional martial arts quite frequently. Now, fun enough, if this feature would actually be part of what makes a technique actually effective, a good part of the fantasy-like knife defense we see around nowadays would work, as there would be, on an average skill level, far more time to grab, manipulate arms, wrists, etc., and the fighting would take much more time. And it would not only be slower because of the fast, slow, fast effect which I just mentioned, but also because to land such an action, which takes more time by itself, you will need to create a technique, a tactic actually, to land the action in the best way, by stealing the time from the opponent, landing multiple actions to divert the attention of the opponent from the real one. And even the filmmakers actually thought about this. By quoting Villeneuve himself, I developed, together with our stunts coordinators and choreographers, a way of combat that is closer to a chess game than a fighting sequence. When you fight someone with a shield, the idea is to distract them with move in advance. You want to distract them with a specific move so you can slowly bring the blade into their body. Let's forgive Villeneuve, which is actually describing fighting in and of itself in most of its cases, by thinking that he's actually describing something new and special. But let's focus on his intention and let's translate what he's trying to say. So this sort of fighting would make the fighters more in line with the idea of staying at a medium to close distance while exchanging blows, which generally speaking is kind of scary. The goal would and should be to use arms and weapons to parry only when the potentially real attack happens. Because for all the other attacks, namely the one which are going at high speed, there is the shield. And this means having a good eye in noticing those tiny body, shoulders and arms movements mean to actually control rather than speed up. It would be actually a fighting style which, for us and our understanding of fighting, would partially go against common sense. So after this little mental gymnastic to understand how contextual fighting is, let's watch at ourselves nowadays. We actually have many rules in our training and fighting style. Stopping after the first hit landed is the most common one actually, which influences our fighting style quite dramatically, by the way. Try to experiment with a 2 hits sparring instead. The fight only stops after hitting or being hit twice. And of course the ideal is not being hit even once, if possible. See how your technique and tactics get dramatically influenced by it. How, at a sudden, the options to engage the fight decrease, while taking into account that the fight will keep going after the first hit. Analyzing dune fighting with its peculiar rules dictated by incomprehensible technologies is a way to understand how a rule set actually functions, and it is useful to figure out how every approach to fighting is always influenced by hard and soft rules, and that, in fact, we are always subject to rules, even when we think we are not. Very good, people. I hope you will find this video useful or entertaining in some kind of way. Thanks for watching as always. Remember to check my Patreon link in the description if you want to support me and especially the channel. Thanks for watching again, and see you next time.